My beloved child, before you scroll away, listen carefully, because there is something about your soulmate that you were never supposed to understand this clearly. The person you once loved, the person who walked away, the person who acted as if they had already moved on, may be carrying a completely different story inside their heart. And this is why the title of this message feels so intense. Imagine your soulmate discovering this exact message and suddenly wishing you would never hear it. Not because something terrible is being revealed, but because something deeply personal is being exposed. There is a truth they have been protecting behind silence, distance, pride, and unanswered questions. They may have convinced themselves that leaving was easier than explaining what they truly felt. They may have told themselves that time would erase the connection. They may even have tried to replace the memories with new routines, new conversations, and a completely different life. But there was one thing they could not replace: the feeling they experienced when they realized how deeply you had affected them. And here is where this story becomes different. Your soulmate did not simply remember you. They remembered the version of themselves that existed when you were in their life. That version of them felt seen, understood, recognized. And perhaps that is the one thing they have secretly missed the most. There was a moment when your soulmate looked back at the past and realized something they had never admitted to you. They misunderstood your silence. They misunderstood your distance. They misunderstood the meaning behind certain things you said and certain things you never said. They may have believed you had stopped caring when, in reality, you were protecting your own heart. They may have interpreted your strength as indifference. And the longer the distance continued, the more convinced they became that the connection had already disappeared. But memories have a strange way of returning when the heart finally becomes quiet. A familiar song. A certain place. A phrase you used to say. A photograph they forgot they still had. Suddenly, the past does not feel like the past anymore. It feels unfinished. And that is the part your soulmate may not want you to discover. Because once they admit that the connection still matters, they also have to confront every question they avoided. Why did I leave? Why did I hold back? Why did I pretend not to care? Why did I wait so long? And most importantly, why does this person still occupy a place in my heart that nobody else has been able to reach? Your soulmate may have spent a long time trying to find an explanation that would make these feelings disappear. But instead of disappearing, the realization became stronger. What happened between you was not as simple as they once wanted it to be. And now comes the part that may completely change the way you look at your soulmate story. They may have been waiting for a sign from you without ever having the courage to ask for one directly. Not necessarily a message. Not necessarily a dramatic return. Sometimes people wait through tiny things. They watch from a distance. They notice changes. They wonder whether you still remember them. They imagine what would happen if your paths crossed again. They replay conversations and create different endings in their mind. And every time they imagine reaching out, another part of them whispers, "What if it is too late?" That question can become heavier than rejection itself. Because your soulmate may not be afraid that you will say no. They may be afraid that you will look at them and realize you no longer need the explanation they once refused to give you. That possibility can shake someone deeply. It means they would have to approach you without the confidence they once had. Without the old excuses. Without pretending everything is fine. They would have to come as the person they really are. And that is exactly why this message feels like something they would rather you never hear. Because the truth is not about chasing them. The truth is about understanding what happened inside their heart after you were gone. But stay with this thought for a moment, because the next revelation is where everything begins to connect. Your soulmate may have discovered that losing access to you was not the same as losing feelings for you. Time created distance, but distance created clarity. And clarity brought back memories they thought they had buried. They began comparing moments, conversations, connections, and emotions. They realized that what they once considered ordinary was actually rare. The way you listened. The way you noticed small details. The way your presence could change the atmosphere without you trying. The way you could make them feel understood without demanding an explanation. These things may have seemed insignificant at the time. Now they may feel unforgettable. And perhaps the most. Without you trying. The way you could make them feel understood without demanding an explanation. These things may have seemed insignificant at the time. Now they may feel unforgettable. And perhaps the most surprising realization is this: your soulmate may finally understand that the person they were searching for was not someone who could replace you. It was someone who could recreate the emotional safety they experienced with you. And they may have learned that those two things are not the same. So if you have ever wondered whether your soulmate remembers you, understand this: remembering is only the beginning of the story. Somewhere beneath the silence, there may be a conversation they have been having with themselves for much longer than you realize. And that conversation is leading toward one question they cannot avoid forever: if they were given one honest moment with you again, what would they finally say? Something has shifted inside your soulmate, and it began with a realization they could no longer push away. For a long time, they may have told themselves that the memories were simply memories, that the emotions would eventually become weaker, and that life would naturally move forward. But then something unexpectedly brought you back into their thoughts with a force they were not prepared for. It could have been a familiar place, an old photograph, a song, or even a simple moment that reminded them of the way you used to look at them. Suddenly, everything they had been avoiding came rushing back. And this time, they did not immediately push it away. They sat with it. They asked themselves why your presence still felt different from everyone else's. Why could they remember tiny details about you while forgetting countless other moments from their life? Why did certain memories still carry an emotion they could not explain? That is when your soulmate may have discovered something uncomfortable but beautiful: they were not missing an old chapter. They were missing a connection they never truly understood while they had it. And the deeper they looked, the more they realized that their own choices had created the distance between you. That realization can be powerful because it removes the easiest excuse. They can no longer blame timing, circumstances, misunderstandings, or silence alone. Somewhere inside, they know they had a part in the story. And perhaps this is why they would rather you never hear the message they are carrying in their heart. Your soulmate may have imagined what it would feel like to hear your voice again, but the fantasy never goes exactly the way they expect. In their imagination, they want to appear confident. They want to say the perfect words. They want to explain everything in a way that makes the past suddenly make sense. But when they imagine actually standing in front of you, the confidence disappears. Because you would not simply be another person from their past. You would be the person who knew them before they learned how to hide certain parts of themselves. You knew their habits, their expressions, their quiet moods, their little reactions. You may have noticed things they never thought anyone noticed. And that kind of familiarity can stay with someone for a very long time. Your soulmate may have wondered whether you still remember those details too. They may have wondered whether you ever think about the conversations that ended too soon, the moments when neither of you said what you really felt, or the times when pride became louder than honesty. And here is the surprising part, they may not be asking themselves whether they loved you. They may be asking why they were so afraid to admit how much the connection meant to them. There is a difference. One question looks backward. The other forces a person to examine themselves. And your soulmate may finally be doing exactly that. But there is another layer to this story that you need to hear, because your soulmate's biggest realization may not be about the past at all. It may be about who you have become since the separation. They may sense, hear, or simply imagine that you are no longer the same person they once knew. Perhaps you became calmer, stronger, more selective with your energy. Perhaps you stopped trying to convince people of your worth. Perhaps you learned that genuine love should not require you to constantly question where you stand. And if your soulmate has noticed even a glimpse of that transformation, it may have created a completely different feeling inside them. They may realize that the version of you they once took for granted is gone. Not because your heart became cold, but because you grew. And that can make someone look at the past with completely different eyes. They may suddenly understand that if they ever approached you again, they could not simply return as the same person they were before. They would have to bring honesty. They would have to bring clarity. They would have to acknowledge the things they avoided. Most importantly, they would have to respect the person you have become. And that is where the emotional tension becomes impossible to ignore. Because your soulmate may still carry feelings for you, but feelings alone are no longer enough. Something inside them is telling them that if they ever speak again, their words must finally match what their heart has been trying to say. And now listen closely, because this may be the one realization your soulmate never expected to have. They may have spent so much time wondering whether you would ever come back that they completely missed the real question: would they be ready if you did? The answer may have changed recently. They may have realized that they are not looking for another distraction, another temporary connection, or another person to fill an emotional space. They are looking for the feeling they experienced when they could be completely themselves around someone. And when they compare that feeling with everything that came afterward, your memory becomes difficult to ignore. This does not mean you should chase them, wait endlessly, or put your life on hold. Quite the opposite. The strongest part of this story is that your soulmate may finally be realizing that your value was never created by their attention. You had that value before they recognized it. You had it while they were beside you. You had it while they were distant. And you still have it now. That may be the truth they find hardest to accept. Because somewhere inside, they may finally understand that the person they once thought they could lose and simply forget became the person they kept remembering. And the next question is even deeper: if your soulmate finally had the courage to tell you everything they have been hiding behind their silence, would you recognize the person speaking to you, or would you realize that they have changed more than you ever imagined? There is a reason your soulmate keeps returning to one particular memory of you, and it may not be the memory you expect. It is often the smallest moment that stays with someone the longest: a look across the room, a quiet conversation, the way you smiled when you were genuinely happy, or the moment you made them feel understood without asking for anything in return. Your soulmate may have remembered the big moments first, but over time, the tiny details became more powerful. They may suddenly remember how you reacted when they were having a difficult day, how you noticed when something was wrong even when they said nothing, or how comfortable silence could feel when you were together. Those memories may have become emotional fingerprints, small reminders of a connection that was much deeper than they understood at the time. And perhaps this is what they never expected after the separation. They thought distance would make you less important, but distance gave them space to finally recognize what they had been experiencing. They may have tried to convince themselves that what happened between you was simply part of growing up, part of learning, part of moving forward. Yet every time life became quiet, the same realization returned. Some people leave your life and become memories. Others leave your daily life but remain part of the way you understand love itself. Your soulmate may now be realizing that you belong to the second category. Then something else may have happened. Your soulmate may have started imagining a conversation that never happened. Not a dramatic conversation. Not an argument. Something much simpler. They imagine sitting across from you with nothing left to hide. No pride. No carefully chosen words. No pretending that everything was easy. In that imagined conversation, they finally tell you what they could not say before. They tell you that they noticed more than you realized. They tell you that your absence affected them more than they admitted. They tell you that there were moments when they wanted to reach out but stopped themselves because they did not know how you would respond. They may even admit that sometimes they opened an old conversation, looked at your name, typed something, and then deleted it. Not because the feelings disappeared, but because they could not find words strong enough to explain everything they had been carrying. And the strangest part is that they may not even know whether you would want to hear it anymore. That uncertainty can become the very thing that keeps someone silent. They wonder whether the door is closed. They wonder whether you have moved forward. They wonder whether the person they once knew would even recognize the person they have become. But beneath all those questions is one quiet hope, that perhaps the connection was not meaningless simply because the story became complicated. Now imagine the moment your soulmate finally understands what they actually lost. It was not simply your presence. It was the possibility of becoming a better version. Themselves beside someone who saw their potential. You may have challenged them without trying to control them. You may have encouraged them without realizing how deeply your words stayed with them. And after you were gone, they may have discovered that certain lessons were attached to your presence. They learned that communication matters. They learned that timing does not excuse emotional hesitation forever. They learned that assuming someone will always be there can create distance that becomes difficult to repair. Most importantly, they learned that love is not only about what you feel privately, it is also about what you are willing to communicate honestly. This realization may have changed the way they look at every relationship that followed. They may now recognize moments where they repeated old patterns, moments where they held back, and moments where they wished they had handled things differently with you. That is why your soulmate may feel emotionally pulled toward the past again. Not because they want to live in yesterday, but because there are truths from yesterday they never finished understanding. And one of those truths may be that your connection mattered far more than they allowed themselves to admit. But here is the part that could make this entire story feel completely different. Your soulmate may no longer be wondering whether you still care. They may be wondering whether you would even recognize their feelings if they finally showed them. They may have realized that the old version of your relationship cannot simply be recreated. Too much has changed. You have changed. They have changed. Life has changed. And perhaps that is exactly why the idea of reconnecting feels so significant to them. They are not necessarily dreaming about going backward. They may be imagining what it would look like to meet you again as two people who understand the past more clearly. Two people who no longer need to hide behind pride. Two people who can finally say what they should have said before. And if your soulmate has been quietly carrying one unfinished sentence, it may be this: I never stopped caring as much as I pretended I did. That sentence may explain why certain memories keep returning, why certain emotions still feel familiar, and why the idea of you still has a different weight in their heart. But there is one final piece to this revelation, and it concerns something your soulmate may have recently discovered about you, something that could make them realize that if they ever get another chance to speak, they cannot waste it. Something about you has become clearer to your soulmate, and it may be the very thing they never understood when you were together. They are beginning to realize that your silence was never emptiness. Your distance was never proof that you stopped caring. There may have been a whole emotional world behind the things you never said, and now your soulmate is looking back at those moments with completely different eyes. They may remember times when you gave them opportunities to be honest, moments when you waited for clarity, moments when you hoped they would finally say what was in their heart. At the time, they may not have recognized the significance of those moments. Now they may understand that you were quietly giving them chances to meet you halfway. And when they look back, they may realize how many of those chances they allowed to pass. This is where regret can become reflection, not something heavy, but something that teaches a person what they truly value. Your soulmate may finally understand that the connection was never about perfection. It was about authenticity. You could see their imperfect side and still appreciate who they were. You could notice their uncertainty without demanding that they become someone else. And perhaps they are realizing that genuine connection is not as common as they once believed. That discovery can change everything, because suddenly the person they once thought was simply part of their past becomes the person who helped them understand what they actually want from love. And then comes a realization they may have fought against for a very long time. They cannot rewrite what happened, but they can finally understand it. They may have replayed old conversations and wondered what would have happened if they had been more open. What if they had answered differently? What if they had stayed a little longer? What if they had told you how they felt instead of expecting you to somehow know? These questions can create an entirely new perspective. Your soulmate may now see that both of you were learning at the same time, and neither of you had the complete emotional wisdom you have today. That does not erase what happened. It simply gives the past a deeper meaning. And perhaps that is why they feel such a strong emotional pull toward the idea of speaking with you again. Not necessarily to demand anything from you, but to finally give you the honesty you deserved. They may want you to know that certain moments mattered. That your presence mattered. That the connection mattered. And if they have ever appeared indifferent, they may now recognize that indifference was sometimes just a mask covering confusion. They may have been trying to look unaffected because admitting the truth would have made them vulnerable. But vulnerability is exactly what they may now understand as the missing piece. Love cannot grow through guessing games forever. At some point, someone has to become brave enough to speak plainly. Your soulmate may also be realizing that you are no longer waiting for them to decide your worth. That realization can be surprisingly powerful. Perhaps they remember the version of you who wanted answers, who wanted reassurance, who wanted to understand what was happening. But now they may sense a different energy around you. You have learned to value your peace. You have learned that love should feel mutual. You have learned that someone's uncertainty does not have to become your uncertainty. And if your soulmate notices that change, they may feel both admiration and hesitation. Admiration because you have grown into someone even stronger than the person they remember. Hesitation because they know they cannot approach you with the same old patterns. If they ever return to your life, they would have to meet you where you are now. They would have to communicate differently. They would have to be honest instead of mysterious. They would have to show consistency instead of relying on memories. And somewhere inside, they may already understand this. That is why the idea of reconnecting may feel so different now. It is no longer about simply returning to what once existed. It is about asking whether two changed people could create something healthier, clearer, and more genuine than before. And now we reach the moment your soulmate may secretly fear the most, not because it is frightening, but because it requires complete honesty. What if you no longer need the explanation they once wanted to give you? What if you have already made peace with the past? What if the person they are finally ready to become is arriving after you have already learned how to live without them? These questions may be exactly what has caused them to hesitate. Yet there is also something beautiful hidden inside those questions. Your growth has shown them that love is not ownership. It is not about keeping someone frozen in the version of themselves you remember. It is about respecting who that person has become. So if your soulmate ever approaches you again, the most meaningful thing they could bring would not be promises or dramatic words. It would be honesty. It would be accountability. It would be the courage to finally say what they could not say before. And perhaps that is the secret behind the title of this message. If your soulmate could speak directly to you right now, they might say, "Please don't watch this because I don't want you to know how much I still remember." But you are not here to chase a person or force a reunion. You are here to understand the story. And the story is not finished with the realization that they still care. The deeper revelation is what they are finally willing to do with that realization, and that is where everything becomes even more unexpected.